Well, after a very bitter battle and very intense, a lot of campaigning, a lot of politicking, um, it wasn't the way that things go on today. The candidates didn't themselves go out and speak. They would sort of issue statements, but their followers do it, and there's very intense politicking among these four candidates. And when the results were in, now we can look at a popular vote. And the winner of the popular vote was Andrew Jackson. He got the most popular votes. I think if you look in your textbook in the appendix, you'll find the results, and you can see the numbers there, and you see that he got the most popular votes. But as you know, and as we're very aware today, it's not who gets the most popular votes that becomes president. It's who gets the most electoral votes. And the man who got the most electoral votes was Andrew Jackson. So he gets both the popular vote and the electoral college. So he's the winner. But the Constitution requires that you get a majority of the electoral vote, more than half. Well, with four candidates splitting the electoral vote, nobody, including Jackson, got a majority. So, when nobody gets a majority, the Constitution says that the House of Representatives will decide who is going to be the president. So now the election goes to the House. And it leaves it up to each member of the House to vote. They don't have to vote the way their people voted. They don't have to vote in the way their district was carried or anything like that. They can vote for whoever they want. But they only can choose among the top three electoral vote getters. The top three winners in the electoral college are then candidates for the House to choose among the three. Well, as it happened, Henry Clay had come in fourth in the electoral vote. He was third in the popular vote, but fourth in the electoral vote. So it comes down to, so he's out. It can only be the top three. It's going to either be Jackson, Adams, or Crawford. And Crawford had very little support, so we could drop him. It's going to become a battle between Adams and Jackson. Well, it's decided by the House, and Henry Clay, as I said, is out of the picture because he had come in last. But he was still a very powerful man in the House. He had been a member of the House of Representatives since 1810, and he is sort of the dominant political figure in the House of Representatives. I mean, that's his base. He's a member of the House. Jackson is from the Senate. Adams and Crawford are from the cabinet. They're from the administrative branch. They both served in Monroe's cabinet. But Henry Clay is the man of the day in the House. And when the House finally finished its result, they elected as president John Quincy Adams. They overruled the popular vote. They overruled the electoral vote. What they did was perfectly legal, perfectly constitutional, but it did set aside the vote, both popular and electoral. And then, John Quincy Adams, as the newly elected president, elected by the House, named his cabinet. And then, as always, the most important member of the cabinet is Secretary of State. That had ever since the days of Jefferson. Jefferson was our first Secretary of State, and to this day, the most important member of the cabinet has always been the Secretary of State. That's always the prime position in the cabinet. So, John Quincy Adams appointed his cabinet, and who do you think he appointed as Secretary of State? If you guessed Henry Clay, you're right. In other words, yeah, Clay sort of maneuvered his election in the House, got him the election in the House, and then was rewarded by being appointed as the key position in the Adams cabinet. Jackson was furious. Jackson was just irate. He insisted that this was a corrupt political bargain. That's the term he used. That this was wrong, that he had been cheated out of the presidency, and it had all been done by the maneuverings of Clay and Adams working in the House and to deprive him of the vote that he had legitimately won. So he spent the next 4 years trying to get his revenge. And what he did was to really organize a very successful political party. And it's a little bit complicated, but and the terminology is a little bit confusing here because it kind of changes. But I'm just going to get to the bottom line. Initially, Clay and Adams were referring to their party as the National Republican Party. Jackson started referring to his as the Democratic Republican Party. So there's two branches of the Republican Party, one led sort of by Clay and Adams, the other by Jackson. And yeah, he's using the word democracy. Now, if you remember when I talked about the Constitution, back in 1787, Americans had feared democracy. Democracy meant like mob rule. It meant the breakdown of order. And they wanted to say that we're not a democracy, we're a republic. But times have changed. And the word democracy, which had stood for mob rule and the breakdown of law and order in 1787 at the time of the Constitution, democracy has become good. It's become positive. It's become the age of the common man, the ordinary American. And we have adopted more democratic processes. I've already mentioned one. Most states now let the people vote for the electors for their state. They're having a popular vote. It's acceptable for the people to be involved in electing the president. And states are gradually doing away with the requirement that you had to own property in order to vote. This was seen as a great democratic step. We're becoming more democratic. We're becoming more of the age of the common man. So this is called democracy. Now, it's still white men, so you might argue, well, that's not that big a deal. And, well, yeah, it's not that big a deal. But America's made a lot of it, and Jackson is going to take advantage of that by using that word, which has become something that's very popular, to add to his version of the party, the Democratic Republican Party. And he's going to glory in the fact that he's the hero of the common man. And he would use the Battle of New Orleans as proof of the superiority of America over England, England with its royalism and backwardness and old world stuff. America is the new age, the age of the common man, and the common man had won this great victory at New Orleans, and Jackson was the hero of New Orleans, so Jackson is sort of the hero of democracy, and he's calling his party the Democratic Republican Party, and he's going to glory in democracy. And as I say, well, I don't know if you'd really accept that, but that's what happened. And sort of shows something about Americans at that time. Eventually the parties are going to change their names, and just to get to it, the Jackson's party is going to sort of just start calling itself the Democratic Party. Clay and Adams are going to start calling their party the Whigs. And that may say, well, what's that all about? That's a word that we don't know. We know the word democracy, but we don't know the word Whig. Well, that's going to go back to the British politics of even the 17th century, when English politics have been divided between the Tories, and you may know that word. The Tories are the loyalists. They favor the king. And the Whigs were those who were opposed to absolute rule by monarchy. And what the Adams and Clay are trying to say is that they're the Whigs because they're opposed to the absolute monarchy of who? Andrew Jackson. And so they're going to claim that he's advocating for absolute rule. In your textbook, there is a cartoon of him, a Whig cartoon of the day, where he's wearing a royal robe and a crown and everything like that, and they refer to him as King Andrew the First. So what we've got is sort of stereotypes here, but the Whigs are going to say they're the advocate of limited monarchy, and that really what Jackson is trying to do is to become a monarch and have absolute rule, and we're opposed to that, we're the Whigs. And then on the other side is Jackson saying we're the Democrats and we're in favor of the common man and the people. So we've got a new political system now where we're back to two parties with, it's changed, it's the Whigs versus the Democrats. And the Democrats win in 1824. Jackson's political party is very successful, and he defeats, he defeated John Quincy Adams. Quincy Adams ran for re-election and lost. And so Jackson is there, and the Democrats are now in power. So here we are, we're going to go on with the whole issue of the American system. Clay is no longer in the cabinet, but he's back in the House, and he's still the most powerful person in the House. And he's probably the real leader of the Whig Party, and it's opposed to Jackson and the Democratic Party. All right, so we're going to push forward with the continuation of the American system. And specifically, one of the features, remember, is internal improvements, transportation improvements undertaken by the federal government. The states are building canals, private parties are building roads, but the federal government is involved also. One of the federal government's main activities is to improve our rivers and so forth. For the steamboats, the Mississippi River needs a whole system of levees to make sure that it's navigable by a steamboat, and the federal government is doing that. The federal government is supporting this, and that's part of the whole Clay American system, having the federal government involved in public improvements, internal improvements, public transportation. Specifically, one of the projects is a road in the state of Kentucky from the city of Lexington to the city of Maysville. Now, Lexington at one time had been the largest city in the state of Kentucky. It was one of the first cities west of the Appalachians, and it had been a major city in the West back in the 1790s when we first started moving across the Appalachians and settling the West, and so Lexington had boomed. But Lexington is sort of in the middle of the state. It's not on the river. And by the 1820s, the river traffic has, of course, with the steamboats, has really taken off, and the key to the economic growth of all the states is transportation, and specifically for the places where there's the rivers, the Ohio River, which is the northern border of the state of Kentucky, that's where the growth is, that's where the prosperity is, that's where all the action is taking place. And Lexington is not on the river, so Lexington has kind of become a dead city. The big city of Louisville, of Kentucky, is Louisville, which is on the river. That's one of the great river cities that is prospering with all of this expansion of the economic development and the steamboats and so forth. And Lexington is kind of left behind. So the proposal is to build a road by the federal government from Lexington, which is in the middle of the state, to the city of Maysville, which is a little tiny town, but it's on the river. It's on the Ohio River. So the Maysville Road would enable Kentucky to kind of participate in the river traffic. We'd have a road connecting Lexington to Maysville, And the idea is that Maysville would grow as a river port, and it would challenge the Louisville, and it would enable Lexington to kind of benefit. So Congress passed a law for the Maysville Road. And that's just one example of a classic example of the whole Clay American system, the national government supporting economic development, and that's what Clay wants. And this is just one example of it. It's just one relatively small example of a project that the federal government is going to build to promote economic growth, specifically to help the city of Lexington. So Congress passed that bill. I mean, it's passed by Henry Clay. Clay's from Kentucky, and Clay is the dominant influence in Congress. And guess what? Andrew Jackson vetoed it. The Maysville Road veto of 1832. And Clay was able to get a majority to pass the bill, but he couldn't get the 2/3 vote to override it. So the Maysville Road never came about. And why did Jackson why did he veto that law? Because he said, who should build that road? That road is entirely within the state of Kentucky. It runs from Lexington to Maysville. It's not for the federal government. It's up to the state. And what he's saying here is that really the state should have the sensitivity of that. And he vetoed it because he said that's the Congress building something that it's up to the state to decide. This is the state should be having the right to decide if it's going to have that road, the Maysville Road, or not. It's not for Congress to decide. And if the state wants it, then the state can have it. But it's the state's right to decide that. Well, wait a minute. This is the opposition to the whole concept of Clay and the national system and the American system, which is being supported by the Supreme Court in the holding of the federal government. The federal government is supreme. The federal government can do things. We're one single nation. And here's Jackson saying, no, wait a minute. This is sort of back to the old-fashioned republicanism. This is the classic idea of states' rights. And so he vetoed the Maysville Road, and it never came about. Now, another issue that's going to come up in Jackson's administration involves another component of the American system, the Bank of the United States. Well, by the 1820s, the Bank of the United States had a president named Nicholas Biddle, who was doing a very good job. The bank was a big part of Clay's plans. The bank was a big part of the whole industrial expansion and prosperity of the 1820s, and so the bank was very popular. And so in 1832, Clay and Biddle got together and said, let's renew the charter of the bank. The bank had been chartered, remember, it had been first passed in 1816. It's a 20-year charter. It's going to expire in 1836. But they said, let's not wait till 1836. Let's renew it now in 1832 and get a 20-year charter. So instead of running till 1836, it'll run to 1852, and we'll get it now, and we'll take advantage of the fact that the bank is very popular. So they put this law through, and Congress approved renewing the charter of the bank for another 20 years, starting in 1832. So Congress passed that law in 1832. And we'll leave it there and come back in our next lecture.